Half-Life is a science fiction first-person shooter game developed by the company Valve. First released in the year 1998 by Sierra Studios for PC, the game was then released for PlayStation 2, whilst Linux and OS X ports were made available in January 2013. In the Half-Life series, players take on the role of Dr. Gordon Freeman, a physicist who runs into unforeseen consequences and must fight his way through the Black Mesa facility due to experimentations with teleportation technology ending in a disaster. Originally, many publishers believed Valve's Half-Life model was too ambitious, and consequently Valve had a hard time finding a suitable publisher. However, Sierra Online eventually signed Half-Life after showing their heavy interest in making a 3D action title. The game's engine, known as Gold Source, was a heavily modified version of the game Quake's engine, originally created by ID Software. On release, Half-Life received great feedback due to it being narrative-driven and flowing perfectly, as well as coming across as realistic in the sense of gameplay. Half-Life won over 50 PC Game of the Year awards, and its gameplay and design model influenced many modern first-person shooter titles for many years after its release. By November 16, 2004, Half-Life had sold over 8 million copies, and by December 2008, that figure had only inflated to 9.3 million copies sold. By the 14th of July 2007, Half-Life as a franchise had sold over 20 million units worldwide. Half-Life received its first public appearance at the 1997 Electronic Entertainment Expo, in which they demonstrated their animation and artificial intelligence systems. Valve hired Mark Laidlaw, a sci-fi author, in August 1997 to work on Half-Life's characters and level design. The soundtrack for the first game was composed by composer Kelly Bailey. Half-Life was originally going to be shipped in 1997, however this idea was set back due to Valve deciding the game needed to be reworked on. Two demos of Half-Life were released, known as Uplink and Half-Life Day 1. Day 1 contained the first fifth of the full game and was only distributed with certain types of graphic cards, whilst Uplink, being released on February 12, 1999, was a demonstration that was set 48 hours into the game, with its levels being cut from the original game during its development phase. Half-Life spawned other titles and expansion packs, which included Blue Shift and Opposing Force. They were both developed by the company Gearbox Software and followed the events in the first Half-Life game, but from two different perspectives. Blue Shift let the player take on the role of Barney Calhoun, a security guard employed at Black Mesa, whilst Opposing Force let the player assume the role of Adrian Shepard, a US Marine and one of the enemy characters in the original Half-Life game. Half-Life 1 also paved the way for the 2004 release of its sequel, Half-Life 2. The game's development cost $40 million to complete, and this was around the time that Valve had started and continued developing their popular software distribution system known as Steam, which was also being developed alongside Half-Life at the time. Half-Life 2 was the first single-player video game to require online activation due to the new Steam integration system. Half-Life 2 also introduced the new Source engine. The Source engine was a successor to the previous engine known as Gold Source, and the engine was first released with Valve's other title, Counter-Strike Source, closely followed by Half-Life 2. The game featured advanced physics, animation, sound quality, and artificial intelligence, as well as upgraded graphics since the first Half-Life. It received 39 Game of the Year awards and the title of Game of the Decade at Spike's 2012 Video Game Awards event. By December 3, 2008, over 6.5 million copies were sold, which didn't include Steam sales of the game, and by February 9, 2011, Half-Life had already sold over 12 million copies. Half-Life, like its previous title, mainly focuses around physics and puzzles in order to complete the levels, as well as secret Easter egg locations known as Lambda sites. These Easter eggs and added bonuses made Half-Life more rewarding for players who enjoyed exploring the game's levels rather than solely conforming to the linear-based storyline. Unlike the first game, Gordon Freeman, the protagonist once more, is faced with bringing down the entire Combine Overwatch, whose sole purpose is domination of worlds including Earth, which they took over in 7 hours, which is known in the Half-Life universe as the 7-Hour War. The instabilities caused by the disastrous events in the first game, due to the teleportation technology resulting in a disaster, caused aliens from the planet Zen, or the Border World, to flood into the Earth through the dimensional rifts in the Black Mesa facility, and this is why the Combine Overwatch took interest in invading Earth. Half-Life 2 was a popular rumour and was unconfirmed until the events that unfolded at E3 in May 2003. Originally it was set for release in September that year, although it was delayed as Valve ran into problems regarding a break-in on their network. The network break-in led to the full leak of the game's source code, which included many files such as its maps, models, and early playable versions of Half-Life 2 and Counter-Strike Source in early September that year. In October of the same year, though, CEO of Valve Gabe Newell publicly addressed the community via the site halflife2.net about the events surrounding the time of their leak, and requested users to give them information in tracking down the users responsible for the leak. In 2004, in June, the FBI had arrested several suspects of the case, and Valve claimed the leak was down to a German black hat hacker known as Axel Gembe. Gembe had contacted Newell through email after the leak. Gabe Newell responded to Gembe's emails, who falsely believed Valve had interest in employing him. He was to take a flight offered to him by the USA from Valve to the United States and be arrested on arrival by the FBI. However, Germany found out about this plan and he was arrested in Germany instead. Gembe's final judgment was 2 years probation for the incident. Half-Life received great public acclaim and feedback. Valve released the Source SDK, which allowed users to use the Source engine and its power in order to create modifications by creating models and face-posing them in scenes, creating maps and scripting stories in order to craft their own storylines as well. The modding community of Half-Life is vast, in hundreds of mods of Half-Life and Half-Life 2 surround the internet today. Sites such as ModDB and Steam's mod page are sources for downloading mods for Half-Life. These mods include popular mods such as S-Mod, Pirates, Vikings and Knights, Chivalry, and Jailbreak Source. One of the most popular Half-Life 2 mods is Gary's Mod, a sandbox title created by Gary Newman which allows players to use the content from Valve's games in order to build structures and much more. More recently though, modders completed the project Black Mesa Source, which is an entire remake of Half-Life 1 in the newer and improved Source engine, as well as another third-party release known as Black Mesa, which is a very similar project and is available for Steam for purchase. Since Half-Life 2 though, Valve has released other titles known as episodes, which break up the story into smaller sections. They have released Lost Coast, a free title intended to showcase Source's technology, and they have also released the first expansion known as Half-Life Episode 1, which takes place immediately after the storyline events of Half-Life 2, and also the second episode known as Half-Life 2 Episode 2, which follows on from the events from the first episode. On the topic of future releases though, fans are still crying out for a third game, Half-Life 3. Although Gabe Newell, CEO of Valve, has stated the episodes are essentially Half-Life 3, and a third episode is expected to be released sometime in the future to complete the trilogy. In May 2011, Newell stated that the episodic model has been replaced by shorter development cycles and continued updates via Steam. It is thought that Valve are focusing on their free-to-play titles Dota 2 and Counter-Strike Global Offensive, which is a paid title. Whether we will see a third episode of Half-Life 2 or a third Half-Life is still unknown, though fans can only hope they will one day play Half-Life 3 or Half-Life 2 Episode 3.